Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar. I'm Daita Sergi, Education Programs Manager with AASHE, and I'll be the moderator today. It is my pleasure to welcome you all. And thank you so much for all of you who have submitted the poll. Let's see how everybody is doing today. So most of you are ready to rock and also looking for spring. Well, we are too. So let's get started though with our webinar. Put your best report forward, STARS Data Quality Bootcamp. As many of you know, AASHE's mission is to inspire and catalyze higher education to lead the global sustainability transformation. We are an international association with about 1,000 members spread across more than 20 countries, including China and Switzerland. We serve as the professional home for campus sustainability staff, but we offer resources for everyone in higher education. We provide an expansive collection of online resources, educational tools, and other events such as today's webinar and an annual conference and expo which will be held in Pittsburgh on October 2nd to the 5th. The call for proposals is available with a deadline of February 16, so check it out on our website. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Everyone in the audience is on mute, but please feel free to ask questions or provide comments at any point during the presentation. You can do that by typing your questions or comments in the questions pane in the control panel on your screen. If you have additional questions, please email them to us either at stars@aashe.org or at education@aashe.org, and we will get back to you. At the end of the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to provide feedback regarding today's presentation. We take your suggestions into account when planning for future webinars, so please do provide this feedback. This webinar is being recorded. If you have technical difficulties or have to leave early, you and others can view the recording later. The recording and presentation materials will all be available in the Campus Sustainability Hub. At this time, I'd like to introduce today's presenters, my colleagues, Monica Urbanski and Crystal Simmons. Monica joined AASHE in summer of 2011 and currently manages AASHE's publications, resources, and STARS submission review. Crystal joined AASHE in August 2013 as editor of the AASHE Bulletin. In addition to this role, she supports various member resources, including STARS and the AASHE Sustainability Awards. You can read more about them on our website. So finally, it is my pleasure to welcome all attendees and thank you for joining us today. Before we start, we also wanted to know a little bit more about your experience submitting a STARS report. So please let us know if your institution has ever submitted a report. So we'll give it a few more seconds to for all of our attendees to have a chance to vote, and let's see what the results are. So 70% of attendees on the webinar today, their institution has submitted a STARS report. This is good to know. So Monica, at this time, I'm going to turn things over to you to get us started.
Thank you, Daita. Okay, just confirming that I have the right screen up. Can everyone see the webinar presentation? Put your best foot forward.
Yep, go ahead.
Great, thank you so much. All right. So to get started, thank you, Daita, first of all. We do have a lot to cover today, so we're going to jump right in. To the next slide here. So the primary purpose of today's webinar is to help you and your institution submit a high-quality STARS report. The majority of this webinar will focus on common issues we found in STARS credits and ways to avoid making some of these common mistakes. But first, we're going to explain several recent changes in report submission, review, and data sharing that may impact your next report. You'll also become familiar with some of our newest data quality resources and opportunities. The first part of today's agenda will cover these recent changes and resources. Next, we'll dig into common issues that my colleague Crystal is going to cover. And then finally, Crystal and I will cover the credit-specific issues. We have a lot to cover and we'll be moving quickly, but we've reserved at least 15 minutes of time at the end for questions. Throughout the webinar, feel free to add questions in the questions pane and be sure to review the webinar recording and accompanying slides once they become available and published tomorrow in AASHE's Campus Sustainability Hub. So one of the biggest changes within STARS has been an increasing emphasis on data accuracy over time. Under STARS version 1, no formal review process was in place, and reports were published as soon as institutions hit submit. Under 2.0, a robust submission review process was introduced, and here roughly 1/3 of credits were reviewed. However, reports are still published instantly, and the review took place after the fact. When STARS 2.1 launched about 2 years ago, a pre-publication review protocol was established. Under this new and current system, every STARS report now undergoes a standard collaborative review and revision process that is intended to catch data quality issues before the report is published. Our team reviews about 1/3 of total credits in each report, focusing largely on credits with higher error rates. We also check all innovation and exemplary practice credits, along with at least 3 random credits. All issues identified by our review team must be addressed before the report is published on our website with a rating. Reports are reviewed on a first-come, first-served basis, and our goal is to have results sent back to institutions within 30 days from the date that the report is submitted. A more recent change, and perhaps one that's more obvious, involves the new procedures for data sharing through STARS. In order to share data with the Princeton Review and Sierra, a completed STARS report must now be submitted, and snapshots are no longer accepted. In addition, Sierra has announced that it will only accept completed STARS reports that have already undergone review and are published to the STARS website. In contrast, the Princeton Review will accept published reports as well as provisional reports that have not been submitted, that have been submitted but have not yet been reviewed. They'll also accept STARS reports with a reporter designation. The latest data sharing changes are explained in more detail on the STARS website, which we've linked to here. Be sure to check those because I know some of the changes I'm announcing today were made very recently, and so there's a chance that you may not be aware of them. The diagram on this slide summarizes the important dates that, that institutions wishing to share data with these other organizations should pay attention to. The submission deadline boxes in blue, those refer to the dates that you must formally submit a report in order to be considered by Princeton or Sierra. The box in gray for data sharing deadline refers to the date that AASHE will share data with Sierra via data export, and will also be using the data for its own publication, the Sustainable Campus Index. So you may be wondering, what are the implications of some of these recent changes? So I'm going to fill you in a little bit about that. The collaborative review and revision process has been successful in raising the quality of STARS reports, but the downside is that additional time is needed for institutions to address issues and have the reports published. We found that high quality reports take less time to review and get published. And I mean this both in terms of the time we dedicate to reviewing and following up, but perhaps more importantly, to each institution's time in terms of following up with their colleagues and others as well. While you will need to wait for AASHE's review results after you submit your report, it will be important to work quickly to address those results once you receive them so that your report is published in time, particularly if you're interested in sharing data. If you wish to share data with Sierra to be considered for inclusion in their Cool Schools rating, or if you want to be included in AASHE's annual Sustainable Campus Index, or at least the index for 2018, the deadline for this year is May 30th. So we want to help you put your best report forward, and for this reason, we've released a new resource and an opportunity in 2018 that will help promote data quality in your reports. The STARS review template is the first resource I'm going to cover. The template highlights common issues that AASHE staff have identified during standard post-submission reviews. We're going to be directing you to this template later through the webinar, so you'll definitely see it referenced a bit more. The main benefit of using the template is higher quality reporting, which, as we've mentioned before, leads to fewer issues during review and expedited report publication and rating. Institutions using the template can earn bonus points under the pre-submission review exemplary practice credit. If a peer review is conducted, points can also be earned under the intercampus collaboration credit. One thing that I think is really important to point out here is that you can use this template informally to promote data accuracy. So we encourage anyone working in STARS to take advantage of this resource. So next, I'd like to briefly mention the STARS Review Pilot. This is a new opportunity in which institutions can earn extra recognition by committing to conducting an internal or independent review using the STARS Review template. Institutions planning to submit a STARS report before June 2018 are eligible and can join the pilot by filling out a simple form on the STARS website, and we've linked to it here. The pilot is the goal of the pilot is to help determine the impact that a standard review process has on data quality, and it will help inform future versions of STARS. So it is pretty important to us getting the results of that at the end, towards the middle of this year. For that reason, we'll be recognizing pilot participants in additional ways. They'll be recognized on the STARS website, as well as in the 2018 Sustainable Campus Index. And we'll also be able to take advantage, if you join the pilot, you'll be able to take advantage of expedited review during the standard review process. This means that you'll receive your review results sooner than at non-pilot institutions submitting around the same time. So definitely encourage you folks to sign up if you're interested or learn more about other data quality resources. So before moving on to the next portion of the webinar, I'd like to summarize some of the most important takeaways from what's been covered so far. As the name implies, the collaborative review and revision process is a team effort. AASHE staff will be connecting with you while you address your review results, and we will be available to answer questions and provide regular feedback. Second, I'd like to underscore the importance of submitting a high-quality report and how it impacts everybody. It'll impact you, the institution, in terms of looking to publish a report in time to meet your data sharing goals. It impacts AASHE staff who are trying to work efficiently through the queue of reports to review. And of course, it impacts the whole campus sustainability community as a whole, which is relying on access to accurate STARS data through our data displays for analysis, research, and benchmarking. Another takeaway to keep in mind is the additional time needed for your report to undergo the standard review process. Please be patient with us in awaiting review results, and keep in mind that it may take several weeks before your results arrive. However, once you've received them, please work as quickly as you can to address them so that you can meet your data sharing goals. So finally, there are plenty of resources available to help you achieve a high quality report beyond the review template and pilot that we discussed today. So please follow the reporting tool and technical manual closely when completing your credits. You can always email stars@aashe.org if you are unsure or have questions. So the remainder of this webinar will highlight common issues and credits that AASHE staff review for every report. Before moving on, I want to encourage you to reflect on the process-related information we just shared with you. So we'll pause just a few moments for that. If you have any questions about what was covered so far related to the process that we discussed, please submit them via the questions panel now. In the meantime, I'm going to hand over the controls to Crystal, who will cover the next portion of the webinar on common issues across all STARS credits. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Monica. This is Crystal. I'm just going to give a couple more seconds for folks to put questions in the questions panel if they have them before we move on. All right, so let's hop on in there. Again, this is Crystal. Thank you, Daita, for that introduction, Monica as well, and for all the attendees on this webinar. So now we're moving on to the next portion of our webinar, which is highlighting some common issues that cut across credits. The 4 common issues that arise, they aren't credit specific, but they are providing supportive responses for claims, credit timeframes, data consistency between credits, and valid URLs. Before we jump into them, let me mention the review template that Monica mentioned earlier. It contains checks and balances for each of the 4 common issues that I'm about to cover. There are 4 columns. You'll see here column D, E, F, and G, and these are the 4 common issues that I'll cover, and I just wanted to highlight them to let you know that they are also part of the review template. Okay, so let's begin by discussing the first common issue, which is lacking supportive responses to claims. Almost all credits have required and/or optional reporting fields for supportive text that back up what you're trying to tell us or, put in the assessment. So using PA6 support for underrepresented groups as an example, I am here on AASHE Test Campus. And I've scrolled down, there's 2 sections that I want in this particular credit that highlight this example: recruitment programs and mentoring, counseling, and support programs. You can see here that under mentoring, counseling, and support programs, it asks if the institution has these programs to support students, to support staff, and to support faculty. And whenever there is an affirmative response to this, what reviewers look for, me and Monica and others, particularly if you're using the pilot or you get another institution or someone else to review your report, coming down here to the brief descriptive field, what they should be looking for is affirmative responses or information that backs up each of the affirmative responses above. And as you can see here in this particular example, the response does not include staff down here, but it does say that they provide them. So this would be flagged as an issue. So I want to switch to another example for you, IN9, which is Green Laboratories. Using this as an example, the credit asks if the institution's Green Laboratory program addresses any of the following items that you see before you. Then in the field immediately after that, again, this is where you would want to provide some supportive responses for your affirmative responses above. So you can see here that the institution claims to have 3 areas covered: energy conservation, chemical use and disposal, and lab training. But down here, they actually only cover 2 out of the 3 of them. So this is an example that would be flagged for revision. Next, we'll move on to discuss the time frame requirement for credits, which is the second of the 4 common issues that I'll be covering today. All credits within STARS have a time frame that sets a temporal aspect to the data and information being reported. Timeframes either they're asked basically in one of 2 ways: current and ongoing practices at the time of submission, or it asks for a snapshot of data within the recent past. So you can find the time frame requirements in the measurement section of the technical manual for all credits except exemplary practice credits. Exemplary practice credits timeframe will be found in the criteria section for each of them. And just in case exemplary practice credit is new for some of you, this falls under the innovation and leadership credits. You have the opportunity to provide 4 innovation credits, and then there's a host of exemplary practice credits. So you can check those out at some point if you haven't already or you're not familiar with them. This particular slide here highlights 2 different examples of the time frame criteria. PA8, Committee on Investor Responsibility, again, section F under time frame. It says report on current committee composition and practices at time of submission. Whereas we see here in OP16 kind of the other way that timeframes are asked. This is student commute modal split. It asks for the most recent data available from within 3 years to anticipated date of submission. As a side note, one common error that we see with this credit in particular, OP16, as well as OP17, which is the employee modal split, is that institutions will often report on data from transportation survey that's older than 3 years. Again, that would be flagged as an issue by a reviewer. So up next, data consistency across credits, which is the third of the 4 common issues. This slide just gives you a visual representation of credit relationships where data exists in more than one place. In a minute, I'll break this slide down, but let me begin by saying at the beginning of your assessment, you have the opportunity to provide certain data on institutional characteristics, and these help define your institutional boundary. And it's such things as gross floor area, building space, or number of academic departments. Sometimes these characteristics are also referenced in other credits throughout the report. And so I'm underscoring the importance of having these figures be consistent from one credit to the other. And also let you know that when the data is not consistent, that you should be providing an explanation in the public notes field. There are two resources that we have that can help you eliminate discrepancies. One of them, I'm popping back over to the review template. This is kind of small, but right here in the review template under column B, you will notice that this is common issues on the academics credit tab, and I'm looking at AC1. And the field that I have highlighted right now, which is for me a blue field anyway, it's the last one, somebody else has a credit highlighted, or one of the fields highlighted. But this credit, this common issue right here highlights the fact that there is a data point between IC3 and AC1, and they should be consistent. Okay, so the second feature that we've developed in an effort to minimize data inconsistencies is a copy from button. In this slide, you can see the relationship between AC1 and other credits, and in this case, it's only IC3. And the new feature that I mentioned, of course, it's pasted there on the slide, and it's a screenshot from AC1 showing the copy from button. Using this button in AC1 will ensure data consistency with your report. All right, so continuing to break that original chart down for you, this slide is another slide that shows relationships between the credits. This slide highlights 7 credits you'll see there on the left that use some combination of weighted campus user data, which is captured in IC3. Weighted campus user data are 6 fields that relate to student and employee headcount and full-time equivalents, such as student and employee headcount, you'll notice that an example of this weighted campus user in that middle screenshot is from IN1, and it asks for number of students enrolled for credit as a headcount. And then also you'll notice the screenshot from PA14, which is full-time equivalent as seen in the lower screenshot right there. Again, those are examples of weighted campus users. And then the last one that I want to mention from that graph, the reason I want to mention it, it's a little bit special. This is an instance where data consistency needs to exist between 2 credits where neither one of them are IC credits. So you can see here that there's a total energy consumption figure that exists in OP6. It also exists in OP5, and those fields should match. If any discrepancies exist, it should be, as I've mentioned, indicated in the public notes field or the notes field. One last note on discrepancies that I want to comment on is, in some instances, discrepancies between credits may be necessary. For example, your institution might use a performance year for the greenhouse gas emissions credit to coincide with the date of your greenhouse gas inventory. And it could be, and it may be earlier than reported elsewhere in your report. So in an instance like that, a discrepancy is fine as long as the rationale for the discrepancy is provided in the notes field under that credit. All right. So the last common, let's see. So the last common issue across the board that we want to cover is about URLs. Many, if not all, credits have optional fields that provide you with the ability to link to further information. In some instances, there are also required URL fields. Reviewers will check the required and optional URL fields to make sure that they work, among other things. So it's important that before you send us the report that you check required and optional URL fields to make sure that they are working and are not behind a firewall. All right, so That concludes the information about the common issues. In summary, supporting responses should be provided for all affirmative answers. The credit time frame should be adhered to, which you can find in the technical manual. Ensure data consistency across the credits by using the copy from button when it exists, and also be sure to provide supportive text when there is a discrepancy. Lastly, before submitting a report to us, check required URLs to validate and optional to validate that they still work and are not behind a firewall. So before we move on to credit-specific issues, I want to remind you again to please enter your questions in the questions panel, and they'll be addressed towards the end of our time together. So now we're going to move right into the credit-specific issues, and with that, I'm going to give Monica the controls.
Great. All right, just confirming that you guys are seeing my screen. Credit-specific issues is the slide we're on.
Yes.
Fantastic. All right, thank you so much, Crystal, for covering the common issues across credits. The next portion of the webinar will focus on credit-specific issues. The credits listed here are those that we've seen relatively high error rates on, so these are the areas we'll focus on for the remainder of the presentation. One thing I want to highlight is that all of the credits we're going to discuss for the remainder of this webinar are reviewed by the STARS review team 100% of the time. This means that if there are issues, we will most likely catch them, so getting it right early means your report can be published sooner. A particular note I'd like to make, we found that adjustments and refinements needed under the academics credits, AC1 and AC2 in particular, do take considerable extra time. Sometimes it requires some back and forth with the academic points of contact at your institution. So to avoid delays, again, please just be sure to follow the credit criteria closely and use the resources that you can to submit information there that is as accurate as possible from the get-go. Okay, so the first credit I'm going to cover is AC1 academic courses. This credit recognizes institutions that offer sustainability courses and that include sustainability in courses across the curriculum. Now, before digging in, I'd like to draw your attention once again to the STARS review template. Okay, here we go. The STARS review template lists all common issues that we've identified. You can see it under column C. Hopefully that's large enough for you all to see. But essentially, column C of the review template is where we list some of the issues that we're going to discuss in this webinar. Now, the nice thing about the review template is it's got some common issues for every single credit within STARS. So it includes a lot more than what we have time to cover today. So once again, I would just encourage you to review the review template and use it as a resource when you're filling out your report. Okay, let me get out of there again and get back to the presentation. There we go. I think I advanced one too many, so let me come back here. So under AC1, there are 4 primary issues identified in the review template that occur with some frequency that users should be aware of. The first 2 common issues relate to the course inventory, and this is of course a requirement under this credit. You must upload a course inventory. The first thing we look for within that inventory is ensuring that all of the information required in the inventory is in place. This includes course title, academic department, level of each course, whether it's a grad or undergrad course, a brief description of the course, and an indication of whether it is a sustainability course or a course that includes sustainability. It's common for institutions to omit descriptions in particular. However, this is always flagged for revision. So we would just say, please make sure that all of these above items are included in the course inventory to ensure that we don't come back and ask you to revise the inventory. Again, this is one credit where significant revisions to the inventory, because that may be time intensive, may result in delays with getting your report published. A second issue for this credit is consistency in course counts between what is reported in the inventory versus what is reported under the credit. And this is where the scoring is based off of. So to clarify, I'm going to go to a report we've identified as a reporting best practice. So when we reviewed St. Louis University's STARS report, one of the things we liked seeing was the special attention paid to ensuring the counts were correct in their course inventory. So here is AC1 for St. Louis University, and then here is St. Louis University's course inventory. What I've done here is I've scrolled to the very bottom of the course inventory. There are 12 pages. But the reason I'm highlighting the bottom is because here they are highlighting pretty clearly what the total counts are within the inventory for sustainability courses and courses that include sustainability, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. And so it's really easy for the reviewer to then look at that number, compare it against what they've reported under that box within the credit, which I'm highlighting here now, and just ensuring that those numbers are identical. Now, there are sometimes valid reasons why a course inventory count may be lower than what is reported in the credit. For example, an institution may be counting all sections of courses under AC1, but the inventory only lists each course a single time, regardless of number of sections. If there is a valid reason for a discrepancy, just please make note of that in the public notes field. Okay, so going back, wow, okay. Looks like we're going to AC2. Oh, I'm sorry, we're still on AC1. My apologies, my mouse is being a little temperamental. So the third issue under AC1 relates to consistency with IC3 for the academic department's figure. But since Crystal had already covered that, I'm just going to skip this and move on to the fourth issue. This is one that has recently become an area of increased scrutiny, and it has also just been recently added to the review template. So definitely take a look there. But this has to do with classification of sustainability courses. Now, we recognize that identifying courses as sustainable courses or courses that include sustainability can be somewhat subjective. For this reason, the STARS credit criteria does provide pretty narrow definitions for what a course on sustainability versus a course that includes sustainability should include. And we did this in part to establish a level playing field for every STARS institution. What we often see is that courses are classified as sustainability courses, but based on what's provided in the course description, it appears that they should instead be counted as courses that include sustainability. The rule of thumb that AASHE reviewers use is that courses should only be classified as sustainability courses if the title and description references environmental or ecological dimensions of sustainability as well as social or economic dimensions. So basically, the most common mistake we see when we're reviewing reports is institutions counting courses that might only address the social component of sustainability. For example, a standard course in social work or international relations would fall under this avenue, but those course descriptions are not making any mention of the environment or ecology, and in those cases, that's where we would question something. This particular issue comes up even more under the learning outcomes credit, which we are going to talk about next. So the learning outcomes credit recognizes institutions with sustainability learning outcomes associated with program degrees and courses of study. There are two common issues outlined in the STARS review template that I'm going to clarify today. First is an issue similar to what we just explained under AC1. Learning outcomes do not necessarily have to use the term sustainability, but they must collectively address sustainability as an integrated concept, having social or economic dimensions of sustainability as well as environmental and ecological dimensions. This is definitely the most common issue we run across for this credit. The rule of thumb here is that academic programs should only be included as having sustainability learning outcomes if environmental or ecological dimensions of sustainability as well as social or economic dimensions are covered in the learning outcomes. A common mistake is counting a program division or learning goal or institutional learning goal, that makes no reference to the environmental side of sustainability and only references the social component. So next, I'm going to reference another credit for AASHE Test Campus. Here we are, AASHE Test Campus AC2. Now, as you can see, they have indicated yes under having a divisional learning outcome. And so we would then go to the descriptive field to read more about it. However, here, as you can see, they're referencing a world cultures general education requirement. And if you read through, it definitely seems to cover the social dimension of sustainability. However, the reference to any environmental or ecological dimensions is missing. In such cases, we would flag the credit for clarification and revision. So in contrast, I wanted to also share a reporting best practice with you. Cal Poly State University has established a set of sustainability learning outcomes for all students, and they actually referenced these in their STARS report under AC2. So I'm just linking to their website where they list the learning outcomes, but as you can see, they have sustainability learning outcomes. These outcomes do cover all undergraduate students, so as a result, Cal Poly was able to earn full points under this credit. So some institutions don't establish formal learning outcomes, and that is okay. The second issue relates to what to do if you are among those institutions. If learning outcomes aren't established, institutions may count graduates from sustainability-focused programs that require completion of one or more sustainability courses, as reported under AC1 academic courses. This means that graduates from programs that make such courses optional to complete the major or only require courses that include sustainability should be excluded. I don't have time to go over the best practice reporting examples here from Southern Oregon University and University of Central Florida, but I did want to point out that they did a nice job of clarifying how graduates from programs that require sustainability courses were counted. So I would encourage you to take a look at those examples as well after we share the slides after the webinar. Okay, oops, nope, I'm advancing now. Okay, so next I'm going to talk a little bit about AC6 and EN6. These are what I like to call sister credits because they're complementary and are similarly structured. AC6 recognizes institutions that are assessing the sustainability literacy of their students, whereas EN6 recognizes institutions that are assessing the sustainability culture of the campus community. So there are two common issues for these credits. First, institutions sometimes confuse a literacy survey with a culture or behavior survey, or vice versa. The basic rule of thumb here is that literacy surveys generally have questions with right or wrong answers, and they're often phrased in sort of an academic context. In contrast, behavior and culture surveys have no incorrect answers, but often phrase questions with that start with phrases like, how often do you ... or how important to you is ... So the requirement is that for each credit, at least 10 questions or a third of the assessment must focus on the topic at hand. So it actually is possible to have a single assessment or single survey that you can use for both credits. And I'm going to share with you next another best practice reporting example, and this one is from Arizona State University. What we liked about ASU's response to these credits is that they demonstrate exactly that, how a single survey can be structured to meet the criteria of both credits. Hopefully you can see here, this is basically a PDF of the survey that was uploaded under the STARS report. But what we liked here is that they have a section on sustainability literacy, where they have 8 questions relating to sustainability literacy. You can see that they have the correct answers highlighted. Again, literacy questions do tend to have correct right or wrong answers. And then once I scroll through there, the next section of the survey begins, which is the section on sustainability culture. Again, there are 8 questions. Here there are no highlights because, again, culture and behavior type questions generally do not have a right or wrong answer. So if you're interested in doing a single survey for both credits, you can look at this example. There are others certainly that you can access through the STARS website as well. Okay, let's get back to the presentation here. Now, the second common issue that I'm going to talk about relates to one that Crystal's already talked about previously, supporting affirmative responses. So both of these credits award points based on whether a representative sample was reached and whether the assessment is administered longitudinally to measure improvement over time. So to demonstrate the common pitfalls, I'm going to once again navigate to AASHE Test Campus and see how they reported under AC6 and EN6. Okay, so here we have AASHE Test Campus, and you can see here that the institution is earning full points because they've indicated that the entire student body was assessed directly or by representative sample, and they've indicated that that a pre and post test assessment of the same cohort was assessed. So then I'm going to scroll down to the descriptive responses. Here, however, is where you'll see that in the follow-up descriptive responses, the supporting information does not back up these claims. So for example, only students in a few sections of a single course were assessed. One can assume that because more sustainability-minded students may opt to enroll in a sustainability course, that would make that sample then not representative. In addition, there's no mention in the descriptive responses here about a pre or post test assessment. When that's the case, one could assume that it was a one-time assessment unless there is something specifically about that. So with all of these issues in mind, you could definitely, this would definitely be an issue that would be, or these issues would all be flagged for follow-up before the report could be published. Going to EN6, I'm going to do something similar here. You can see again, the institution wouldn't be earning full points because they're indicating entire campus community is being assessed. And they're also indicating that they're doing the assessment longitudinally to measure change over time. However, again here, they're talking about student union, tabling in the student union where 150 students filled out an assessment. Based on that response, we would probably assume that, first of all, the first response isn't being backed up because they're only covering students rather than also faculty and staff. And then, of course, there is no mention of a follow-up assessment to see how much improvement happens over time. So again, this would be a credit that we would flag for follow-up. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and cover one more slide. This is under the engagement section of STARS, and then pass things back along to Crystal. So we're talking about the Employee Educators Credit. This credit awards points for having a peer-to-peer education program for employees. EN1 Student Educators Program is the sister credit for EN7. However, we see fewer issues for that credit, so we're not really going to talk about it too much here. So the most common issue we see under EN7 is that institutions often reference programs or initiatives that really shouldn't count under the credit. In some cases, there's just no clearly defined peer-to-peer component. And in others, the program itself isn't really focusing enough on sustainability. It may be open to sustainability, but it's not what the program is about. So the rule of thumb here is to basically only pursue the credit if the institution has a program that promotes knowledge sharing among peers. So many green office certification programs do this because you have a sort of a champion within a department, and that person educates the rest of their department about sustainability. Employee eco-reps programs also qualify because, again, there's some learning happening where there's a champion that will then educate their peers. In other cases, institutions may develop peer-to-peer programs of their own to fit their needs. I've highlighted here a best practice reporting example from University of Victoria. Their staff sustainability network was really unique and really, they had really thorough responses. So this is a great example of sort of a well-established peer-to-peer program that you could have recognized under STARS for this credit. So I would encourage you to review the response to get a better idea of the intent of this credit. So briefly going to cover the other two issues here. Another issue to watch out for is, again, that inconsistency, potential for inconsistency between EN7 and EN3. And then finally, the third issue is avoiding data outliers and overcounting. The numeric responses under this credit focus on the number of employees served, i.e. directly targeted by a peer-to-peer sustainability outreach and education program. Exact counts on these types of figures can be challenging to acquire, so we recommend using conservative estimates based on existing information. All right, so that's the last credit under engagement we're going to cover. I am going to pass controls to Crystal, who is going to discuss some credit-specific issues within the operations category and elsewhere.
Great, thanks, Monica. Okay, so I'm going to be discussing a couple operations credits, as well as a credit in planning and administration. And so we'll start here with OP3, building operations and maintenance. And this credit is broken down into two aspects: certified space and uncertified space. And the biggest issue that we see under certified space is that institutions will put in square footage here, and then down here in the brief descriptive space, they will list their buildings, and it's not uncommon for these to actually be certified under the wrong standard. The most common issue that we see is they are actually claiming square footage that's been certified under LEED building design and construction. And that is actually covered in OP4. So you'll see, notice at the top of this credit, we also mention this. And so hopefully it's another reminder that building design and construction square footage that's been certified should be reported in OP4. So moving down to uncertified space, this is an effort to recognize green building performance without having to be certified. And it asks about published policies and benchmarking programs. And the most common issue that we see here is that institutions will claim practices and strategies instead of policies, and for both of them. And then for energy management and water management and benchmarking, again, we see practices as opposed to benchmarking programs that might include dashboards or analytics tools and things like that. So here in AASHE Test Campus University, I've provided an example for you. It says that 100% of the building space is covered by energy management system. Yet in the descriptive field, it just says that a management program is well established with well-trained and qualified engineering team. So this is an instance where it would be flagged more than likely for review, and would have to be addressed before it could be moved on. Okay, so I have the pleasure of reviewing OP7, food and beverage purchasing, with you. Of the issues mentioned in the review template, I'm going to cover two of them. As some of you might be aware, the STARS assessment requires an inventory upload for OP7 to support your response for the percentage of food and beverage expenditures that are considered sustainable. And what we commonly see is that the inventory is not valid. And it's usually because it doesn't contain all of the information that we need to verify the claim. If the inventory is not based on the STARS inventory template, which we provide, or it's not a real food calculator, then it's got to have these 4 required elements, and they're mentioned in the credit criteria of the technical manual. And if any of these elements are missing, reviewers can't validate the claim of this percentage, and more than likely it will be flagged for revision. The other common issue that arises in OP7 is that some schools choose to use their own definitions when inventorying food purchases. And that can be okay as long as it's more stringent than the STARS requirements. So just briefly, what we require in order to count, these foods must meet one of the formally recognized sustainability standards that we have listed in the standards and terms in the technical manual, or they have to meet the real food definition of local and community-based. And this is the most common thing that people get wrong, is that they'll consider local, but they don't consider ownership, which is what's captured by the phrase community-based. And so in order to address this, schools should review the 2-page classification guide that we've referenced in the review template. And this clarifies the requirements for what should count as local and community-based or third-party certified. Linked for you to review at a later point in time is a best practice reporting example from Texas A&M. Moving on to OP11, which is sustainable procurement. This credit is broken up into 3 sections. I'll be addressing the main issues that we find in all 3 sections. Part 1 looks at institution-wide purchasing policies. So the most common issue that we see here is that institutions will claim commodities which are covered in Part 3 of this credit, as opposed, again, to general purchasing policies. And specifically what we're looking for here are policies that reference general environmental and social preferences. And as an example, I'm moving over to show you South Seattle College, and under Part 1 for their institution-wide policies, they've uploaded a guide for vendors. And so a brief scan of this down on page 3 for us reviewers right here is a general preference for green purchasing. So that qualifies as an institution-wide purchasing policy. So the second issue that we see in this credit resides in Part 2, which is about life cycle cost analysis. And for clarity, if your institution employs LCCA as a matter of practice when evaluating all or some energy and water using products and systems, then the supporting text should back up the claim. And oftentimes that's what we're seeing, is that the supportive text doesn't back up the fact that all energy and water using products have been evaluated using LCCA. And lastly, Part 3, which covers commodity-specific sustainability criteria. The most frequent issue is that institutions will report on practices rather than have actual policies. So that's what reviewers are looking for, myself included. And practices are recognized elsewhere in STARS. And so this Part 3 references formally published policies. So the last issue that we typically see in Part 3 is that there is an other field. So in OP11, we ask about certain commodities, and then we give you an opportunity to provide information around any other policies that perhaps your institution has that weren't highlighted above. And the issue that we see here is that this is a scoring field. And so the issue that we see here, and why we pay close attention to it, is that an institution will claim something that's already been referenced above or should be referenced above. All right, so moving on to the last credit that I'm going to review with you is PA2 Sustainability Planning. And there are 2 issues that we see frequently flagged in this credit. The way that this credit is set up, it first asks about formally published plans. And in these plans, we're looking for information about sustainability. We also give you a reporting field to highlight if your institution has a sustainability plan. The first issue that we see is that institutions will claim informal plans or planned initiatives or draft plans rather than formal published plans. And so this would be flagged by a reviewer. The second issue we see occurs in the second part of this credit. And this credit captures, the second credit captures measurable sustainability objectives. And in order for reviewers to confirm the sustainability objectives, each response should include, in addition to a list or a sample of the objectives, it should also name the plan where the measurable objectives can be found. And so it's important to note that if you only reference an external document in the response field for measurable objectives, that is not sufficient, and we'll ask you to clarify. Okay, so with that, I'm going to hand the controls back over to Monica, and she'll review the 2 remaining questions before we move into our last segment, which I'm thrilled to say is a question and answer period. Back over to you, Monica.
Great. Thanks so much, Crystal. Okay, so I'm going to round out the discussion on credit-specific issues with 2 more credits found under the Planning and Administration category of STARS. First, I'm going to cover common issues found under PA3 Participatory Governance. So this credit is divided into 2 parts, and there are common issues under each, so I'll cover both. The first part includes 2 types of questions as they relate to participatory governance for students, staff, and faculty. Now, the first line of questioning basically asks whether students, staff, and faculty can each participate in governance through some sort of student government organization, staff council, faculty senate, or similar. We generally don't see issues with this line of questioning. However, the second line of questioning under Part 1 is where the issues come up. Here, institutions are asked whether students, staff, or faculty are elected to the institution's highest governing body, which is usually a board of directors, board of regents, or similar. To count, representatives must be elected by their peers or appointed by a peer organization, rather than, for example, just being appointed by the administration or the president at the institution. So the main issue that we see is that institutions tend to overlook the highest governing body line of questioning, and the descriptive responses tend to reference only that first line of questioning. And I'll show you an example that illustrates this in just a moment. So another common issue is that institutions may correctly reference the highest governing body, but then there's no indication that the student, staff, or faculty representative is elected to that body rather than appointed. So basically, the rule of thumb here is to clarify in the descriptive field the name of the highest governing body, as well as an indication that the representative from each group is elected by peers rather than appointed. So to illustrate, I'm going to once again head over to AASHE Test Campus. And the responses here for AASHE Test Campus are all filled out. They have yes, affirmative responses for every section under Part 1, which is pretty common. So let's look at students. Under students, the response addresses the first line of questioning. Basically, the yes response is affirmed when you review this descriptive field. But if you look closely, the second descriptive, the second yes/no response is not addressed in that response. They haven't even mentioned the highest governing body. So that's pretty common, and this again will be flagged for follow-up pretty quickly. Under the second area, this is now for staff governance. We again have yes responses. Here, the response is a little bit different. They actually do mention that AASHE Test Campus is a member of the board, is on the board or represented on the Board of Regents. However, it's not indicated how that member was selected for that group. Perhaps they were appointed by the president or another team. Maybe they are elected by their peers. So in this instance, the reviewer would most likely ask for additional detail to better affirm that second line of questioning. Now, the response under faculty actually fully addresses the credit criteria. It's a very short and succinct response, but they talk about a faculty senate, and then the response goes on to say that the president of the faculty senate, who is elected by peers, is also a member of the Board of Regents. So actually that response fully meets criteria and would pass during review. Okay, going back here to our presentation. Under Part 2, we see issues less frequently, so I'll only touch on them briefly. Basically, this section is for external community members being involved in governance and having a stake in the institution's decision-making. If you're claiming that there are policies and procedures to identify and engage external stakeholders, you want to be sure that you're also referring to those policies and procedures and that they actually do give community members an opportunity to weigh in on the university's land use, development, and capital investment decisions. So example, something that wouldn't really fit here is referencing the institution's participation in a community partnership. That's actually covered elsewhere in STARS, and it really doesn't touch on the ability for community members to then engage with you. Likewise, including community members on university committees is also not sufficient under this credit in the absence of giving any community members a stake and a voice in those types of decision-making choices for the institution. Okay, so we're going to move on next and discuss one final credit before we move on to the question and answer session. So we're talking about PA11, employee compensation. This credit recognizes institutions that pay their employees and contractors a living wage. Under STARS 2.1, the options for how to determine an institution's living wage vary depending on where the institution is located. So basically, US institutions should use the MIT Living Wage Calculator to determine their living wage, while Canadian institutions should refer to Living Wage Canada. And then other countries, there are other comparable calculators and standards that are in existence. And you can also defer to just indicating the poverty guideline for a family of 4. So under 2.1, the standards for employee compensation were refined to encourage consistency with global standards. And for this reason, Part 1 of this credit requires that living wage calculations be based on a family of 4. And so, of course, the main issue we see under this credit is that folks tend to report on an individual rather than a family of 4. And so this is a new issue that we just realized has been kind of a common issue, and we're starting to check that figure as well in reports. So definitely one that you want to double check. Another issue that comes up deals with benefits. Under Part 1 of this credit, benefits must be excluded, and we get a lot of questions like, can I include benefits under Part 1? And so the rule of thumb here is that you should definitely include benefits under Part 3, but exclude them under Part 1. Okay, so to demonstrate some of what I just told you, I'm actually going to navigate to the MIT Living Wage Calculator. I've selected my locale, which is Allegheny County in Maryland. So once there, you will see a bunch of several tables, but the line that you want to pay the most attention to is this one here, living wage. And so as you can see, this is where the mistakes might come in. An individual may be tempted to report the living wage for one adult. It's, after all, the very first column in this table. But the actual number that you should be reporting is way over here to the right. And we're looking for the number for 2 adults and 2 children, or the living wage for 2 adults and 2 children. So Frostburg State University is located in Allegheny County, Maryland. So if they were submitting a STARS report and they were pursuing PA11, then we would want to ensure, or they would want to ensure, that they are reporting $15.40 as their living wage for the credit. All right. So next I'm going to talk a little bit, oops, I'm sorry, I went one slide too far. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about Part 3. Issues with Part 3 come up occasionally, and the main issue is that there might be some misinterpretation of what a regular permanent employee is. This should include any individual that works full-time or part-time on a long-term basis. In other words, they are not a contractual employee. So I think the rule of thumb here is that essentially if the institution's lowest paid employee happens to be a part-time employee and or one that does not earn benefits, then you don't want to exclude them. The whole point is to find the very lowest paid employee and determine their living wage, including benefits. If they do not earn benefits, then of course their living wage should be determined without those benefits. But the idea is to determine whether the lowest paid employee at an institution is able to support themselves with a living wage. Okay, so that takes us to the end of the credit-specific discussion, and now we are at the Q&A portion of the webinar. So I know that we have covered a lot. Crystal and I definitely realize that there's definitely a lot of stuff that we've included in this. So hopefully we don't expect you to be an expert on STARS after this webinar. But we do hope that you'll be able to use this webinar, the recording of the webinar, as a resource, and then access some of the other resources we've talked about to help you and to help your institution submit a high-quality report with minimal issues. Before moving on, just one more reminder to please keep in mind that once you hit submit on your STARS report, you're not done yet, and we will be in touch to share the results of your review. as the name collaborative review and revision process implies, we're here to collaborate with you to help you publish a high quality report. So with all of that said, we're now going to go ahead and transition to the Q&A portion of the webinar. As a reminder, please be sure to type your questions in the questions pane, and Daita will help us moderate the questions coming in, so she may already have a few questions ready for us to start answering. Thank you in advance for your questions.
Thank you, Monica and Crystal, so much. And yes, we have plenty of questions to go over, but before we start with Q&A, I wanted to let everyone know that, like Monica mentioned, this session, this webinar is being recorded, and the slides will be available with the recording, and you'll also be able to access all the links that Monica and Crystal have embedded in the slides and have mentioned during the presentation. So we will now turn to our audience for questions. And if you have specific questions still remaining after this webinar, feel free to contact Monica or Crystal at stars@aashe.org. So let's get started. The first question that we have is related to deadlines. So do you expect the submission deadline dates to remain about the same for year to year?
Okay, so Daita, the question at the very end of that question, was it, do we expect them to stay the same for next year?
Yes.
Okay, that unfortunately I can't answer the question for next year. Definitely for this year. Now we did just announce an extension. Sierra announced an extension just earlier, or I believe they announced an extension in recent days, and then AASHE recently as yesterday, sent out an email sharing the news of that extension, and that was that there's now a May 30th deadline for reports to be finalized, and also a March 30th deadline for Sierra for you to submit a report for consideration with Sierra. And so those are the dates that I feel like those dates are fairly firm for 2018. However, for 2019, there really hasn't been any additional, we haven't gotten that far yet. I do hope that we'll be announcing the deadlines and all the other data sharing procedures well in advance to when we did that this year. But we won't know until a little bit later. I think we're going to want to see how this new process of data sharing, how it all kind of shakes out and how everything works out. Tweak what needs to be tweaked, and then work with those two additional organizations for next year. But that's a great question. Thanks, Daita.
Thank you, Monica. There is a question about the review template, so I will send the link to the review template so everybody also has that. Does this template cover every single credit or just certain ones?
Yes, good question. I'm going to bounce over to the review template myself. Yes, we have every single credit covered in the review template. If you look at the template itself, we have an instructions and reviewer info tab. So I would recommend reading through that before digging in. And then there are tabs for each section within STARS, including the unscored institutional characteristics section, which we've referenced throughout the webinar today. And it includes every single credit for institutional characteristics. And then the remaining 5 tabs also reference a specific category in STARS. And yes, they do list every single credit. And we've been pretty comprehensive in that the list of issues within one of these tabs are the ones that we are finding. I can't say that with any certainty that we've got everything covered here, but I would say that it's fairly comprehensive. And so you should be able to, if you follow the template, you should be able to, basically identify or know about or learn about the common issues for every credit. Some credits, they don't have a lot of issues. So like one I can tell you right off the top of my head that I just know we don't get a lot of issues about are some of the other purchasing credits, not the one that Crystal covered earlier today, sustainable procurement, but for example, electronics purchasing or cleaning products purchasing or office paper purchasing. Really, there aren't that many issues there, but we do at least list them in the inventory. And then finally, all the innovation credits on the last slide. On the last tab, they are included. There are 4 innovation credits. They're all treated the same. So innovation A through D is kind of entered as 1 credit. And then all of the exemplary practice credits, which I know Crystal gave a quick overview of. This is sort of the new category under 2.1 that was released, where institutions have the option to pursue up to 4 innovation credits or up to any number of exemplary practice credits. Their bonus points under this category are capped at 4, regardless of how many you pursue, but we do actually identify all of the issues that we found in the exemplary practice credits under this tab. So essentially, to answer your question, it is fairly comprehensive. Every credit is covered, but I'm updating the template on a fairly regular basis, perhaps even weekly, because we'll find a new issue that came up that wasn't in there yet. And so it's sort of a living document, but yes, it's fairly comprehensive.
Thank you, Monica. Regarding STARS, what are the next revisions expected for STARS, either minor version 2.x or a major like version 3.0?
Yes, so I can answer that question too, since it's fairly process related. We do expect to release STARS 2.2 by the end of this year. We don't have a real clear date in mind yet, but the goal is, within this calendar year. And so my colleagues in the programs team that aren't on the call with us today, in particular, Julian and Chris, are working, Chris in particular is working pretty much every day on drafting some of the revisions to the credits and bringing them to the steering committee. The steering committee, there's a STAR steering committee that is approving all version changes, and so they are reviewing, credits at their monthly calls. And again, our goal is to have a new version released by the end of the year. It's going to be a STARS 2.2, which means it's a minor substantive change where certain credits can be changed, tweaked and edited, but we're kind of constrained with the types of level of changes we can make. A much major version change won't happen until we go with STARS 3.0, which I would predict won't come any sooner than 2020.
Thank you. Going back to the actual credits, so typically how many sentences and how much detail do you expect in the description supporting affirmative responses? It seems to vary a lot between different submissions.
Yeah, Monica, I'll take that. We can keep the controls on your slide. Do you mind going back to the Q&A slide, please, Monica? This is Crystal. So around supportive responses, it's also not uncommon for us to see, if we ask about a vendor code of conduct around sustainability, an institution might cut and paste all of the text from the entire vendor code of conduct in there, and it's really difficult for us to go through that and verify the sustainability claim. So I think that the best way I can answer that question is to be very specific in providing the supportive response for any affirmative claims that you're making, to make it easy on reviewers to kind of confirm or corroborate your responses, so to speak. That's how I would answer that. And you can always, err on the side of being more verbose, and in the instance that we need more information, we will ask you to clarify.
Thank you, Crystal. So one of the attendees asks, she was told that data that is required for multiple fields would be auto-populated once entered in the first field. Is this not the case?
No, it's not the case. So you have to use the copy from button. So in any credit, in any field where you see a copy from button, it'll say copy from, and it'll tell you where it's pulling it from. So in order to make sure that there's data consistency between that credit and the other credit with that data, you need to press the copy from button.
And essentially that feature, it kind of is an auto-population feature, but we built it in a way to give you flexibility to decide when you want to auto-populate. Because like we had mentioned in the webinar, there might be instances where your numbers might not match exactly with what you report under institutional characteristics.
Thanks, Monica.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there is a question about that. Workplace health and safety questions are related to regulatory reporting requirements. Methodology for counting staff is different from that for other credits. OSHA requires that we count all employees, so if a person left and another was hired for the same position, OSHA would count that as 2 people when it is just 1 position. It will always be different. I would not link them. Said.
Go ahead, Mom. Sorry.
Yeah, sure, I can take that one. Essentially, yes, that exact example has come up under that credit. So we didn't talk about the workplace health and safety credit. It's not one that we review for every report. It's one of those that comes up as a random review credit. So we might review for every 3 to 5 reports. But I will say that that example that you specifically mentioned has come up before. And what we do in that instance is, again, as you know, per Crystal's guidance, if you're going to have a discrepancy, just provide a note in the public notes field. Exactly what you said, you know, what you had read back to me, Daita, would be perfect. And just putting that note that OSHA has certain requirements and we have to be in alignment with them. And so these numbers differ from what is reported under IC3 would be a perfectly fine note to include there.
Thank you. What if there's a possibility that URLs may change between the time the report is submitted and the time it is public? Is there the opportunity to update them?
Yes. So if I understand the question correctly, it was, what if there's a discrepancy or the URL doesn't work? What was the time frame, Daita, between when and when?
In the time the report is submitted and the time it is public, if URLs change, can they update them in the public?
Yeah, so what'll happen if it's not caught before it's submitted to us during the collaborative review and revision time period, if we find that it's not working and it's a required field, or if it's an optional field, we'll still give that to you back in your emailed results and say this URL doesn't work, please update it. If it's an optional field, you don't have to update it, but it's nice to keep those current to the extent possible.
Thank you.
Daita, one additional comment I wanted to make about that question. I don't think that it was posed in this way, but there are definitely instances where the URLs, like sometimes the institution does like a full revamp of their web structure and all their links are changing. Sometimes they do redirects and sometimes they don't. But if your institution's report is already published and you realize that issue has happened and all the links in your already published report no longer work, or a lot of them don't, there is a feature in the process in the whole STARS framework where you can submit a data revision and revise data. And the difference here is we're talking about a report that's already published versus what Crystal was talking about when the report is still in review mode before it gets published. But yes, for a published report, you can also update URLs, and that's a fairly common usage for that revision feature where an institution just wants to go in and update a couple of URL fields or something else would come up. And so it's an option for not just URL fields, but for any type of field in STARS where if you realize, oh, we made a mistake on this, here's the actual numbers, here's the correct URL, you can submit that via data revision and it will show up in your published report.
Thank you. So going to credit-specific issues, in AC1, may the course description be an embedded live link to the course catalog?
Yes. So we've had this happen in a few inventories where, and I think this is what the question is getting at, but essentially, you know, you do have to have a course description. For whatever reason, a lot of institutions like to link directly to that course description. And so if there's a live link in the inventory itself that takes you to a page that lists the course description, we will accept that. What we probably will not accept though is if there is a link, you know, the same link for every course that takes you to the general course catalog web page for the institution. And then that puts the onus on us then to have to search for any course that we want to, spot check. So yes, if you link directly to the course description but don't copy and paste it into the inventory, we have accepted that. There are a few if you want to follow up with me, I can even pull up some of the institutions that are doing that and share that with you afterwards.
Thank you, Monica. We're at 4:20, the time listed as ending for this webinar, but there's still plenty of questions. So if we can stay for a few more minutes, I think we'll go over a couple more. And if our attendees have to leave, you can review the recording, and we'll probably send also some of these questions in writing that you can review tomorrow. So going back to AC1, for the definition of courses that include, do these also need to include at least 2 components, for example, ecological and social?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. I'm gonna probably see if I can pull up what, yeah, I'm gonna try to pull up the actual definition for that credit. Which I'm gonna have to find one way or another. But yes, the standards for courses that include sustainability are a little bit more relaxed. And so I'm not remembering right off the top of my head if it's requiring 2 of 3, but let's see if the definition information here has it. Unfortunately, it doesn't. I'm just looking to find, okay, here we go. No, okay. Oh, here we go. So courses that include sustainability are primarily focused on a topic other than sustainability. And a lot of times they incorporate a unit or model on sustainability or a sustainability challenge. It includes 1 or more of the sustainability focused activities or integrates sustainability issues throughout the course. It doesn't really say anything about 2 of the 3 dimensions of sustainability. I think that if at least one of them is covered in a very clear and concise way, then it would most likely count under courses that include sustainability. But I would just encourage you to go to the technical manual of the credit criteria. I'm sorry, go to the technical manual for AC1. And under that credit, you'll be able to pull up the definitions for sustainability courses. And then just review the courses that include sustainability information there so that you can basically, classify those types of courses correctly.
Thank you, Monica. We'll move away from AC1 and move to operations. Should we include LEED certification for commercial interiors in OP4?
Hey, the answer to that question is yes. It counts under OP4 LEED certification for commercial interiors. Mm-hmm.
Okay, another OP question. This is for OP21. We have 3 different electronic waste programs, and only one of our e-recycler is a classified responsible recycler under R2 standards. For the question, is the institution's electronic waste recycler certified? Would you answer yes, no, or unknown?
I'm actually not super familiar with OP21. Monica, can you answer that question?
Yeah, so Daita, what's can you repeat the question for me, please?
Yeah, they have 3 different electronic waste programs, and only one e-recycler is a certified responsible recycler. So how they answer the question, is the institution's electronic waste recycler certified? Okay,
let me see if I can find. I remember that that's asked in the end of the credit. Is the institution's electronic waste recycler certified under the e-stewards and/or responsible recycling R2 standards? My assumption is that if you have two waste handlers at your institution and at least one of them is certified, then that you should be able to earn points for that. And then I mean, I can definitely confirm with Chris too, who is sort of the one of the folks that is like the point person for some of these credit technical questions on these credits, he might be able to answer this better. But if you do kind of have sort of a nuanced response like that, essentially, you know, make the best choice. And in this case, I think you should still be able to get points. But again, for anything where you're a little bit unsure, clarifying that in the notes field will be super helpful. And that way, if this credit gets reviewed by one of our reviewers, or if you have somebody else looking at your data, it won't come up as a question, or they'll be able to see that and say, oh, okay, that makes sense. Not an issue. Let's move on.
All right, let's move to PA3. Did you say an academic senate counts for the highest governing body?
No, usually an academic senate would count only under that first line of questioning. So let me go back to the credit here. So the first line of questioning is where we're basically asking if you have a student senate, academic senate, faculty senate, student government, staff council, and things like that. But for the highest governing body, we are looking for something that has control over all aspects of the institution. So by definition, an academic senate would probably only really cover the academic affairs portion of the institution. And so generally those would not be considered the highest governing body. A lot of times, like I said, it tends to be a board of directors or something similar. In some instances, particularly if you're part of a larger system of schools, you may not have a high governing body at your institution, but you may have a board of regents. For example, I know University of Maryland has a board of regents, but they don't have a high governing body at Frostburg State University, where I used to work. And so in those instances, if you don't have a high level governing body at the institution, you would want to defer to the highest governing body at the system level and provide responses for that.
I think there is actually another question regarding this credit. What is the definition of elected? My institution has a student representative on the highest board who is nominated by a student elected body, but ultimately chosen by a non-student committee.
Yeah, yeah, we get questions about that a lot, and there are there's definitely a gray area, but essentially and it sounds like you said that they were nominated by their peers, by a student committee. And so I'm guessing maybe they put forth one or more nominations, you know, 2 or 3 people were nominated, and then maybe the committee, the non-student committee, chose somebody out of those 3. It'd be interesting to get a little bit more detail. This is one where, you know, having that clarification written down would be helpful. And so I think that if they are nominated by a committee and then there's a little bit more decision making coming up, then it would probably still count. It's just that we want to avoid letting folks you know, earn extra points for a credit because, you know, they basically just kind of are reporting on a governance system where, you know, essentially the institution just appoints somebody. But in this case, it sounds like the students themselves were having a role in the selection process, a fairly significant role in at least nominating somebody. So I think it would most likely count.
Thank you, Monica. We only have time for one more question, and we will follow up with you individually if your question did not have time to be answered. So can you please give us a bit more information about how you recommend conducting an internal or independent review to participate in the STARS review pilot?
Yes, absolutely. No, it's a great question. So this is one that's come up a few times. As I mentioned before, and let me go back to that credit as well. The pilot is essentially a way to try to give additional recognition for, find it here. Oh, I went too far again. It's giving additional recognition for conducting either an internal review or an independent review. So, oops. Here's where I'm gonna, oh, there's a pointer. I've been forgetting to use the pointer here. So yes, the pilot will recognize an internal or independent review. The catch, of course, you have to use the standard review template that we've been referencing throughout the webinar. It doesn't matter, but it really, aside from that, it doesn't matter who is conducting the review. So if you go with an internal review, it could be somebody within your institution. Ideally, though, we would ask that that's somebody who hasn't been too closely involved with the credit, submission, population of data within the reporting tool. Perhaps somebody, it could be somebody, a supervisor of the person that does that even, but somebody who's got a little bit of separation from actually being the point person for data entry would be ideal. But you can nominate somebody internally within your own institution. That may be the quicker and easier route. The independent review is where you can actually try to work within your circle, your external network of campus sustainability colleagues to try to identify somebody that can conduct an internal review. One of the recommendations I have for this is selecting, maybe you have a regional network or committee on campus sustainability, and you might get together with them and say, okay, let's review each other's reports. Getting up to 3 to commit to do that would be nice, because then you can all review each other's without having 2 institutions reviewing each other's simultaneously. So essentially having institution A review institution B, B reviewing C, and then C reviewing A would be ideal. But it's okay too if institution A reviews institution B and institution B reviews institution A. For the purposes of this pilot, it's really an experiment to see, whether internal review or independent review is comparable or similar, or whether there are big differences. And so we're leaving the we're trying to narrow the restrictions and make it as flexible and as easy for folks to participate as possible. But I'm glad you guys mentioned it. Make sure you sign up for the pilot if you're interested. Just make sure that you're looking to submit a report fairly soon before June 2018.
Thank you so much, Monica and Crystal, for sharing your expertise on the STARS reports with our audience. We are at the end of our webinar. If anyone has additional questions, please email us at stars@aashe.org. Again, the recording and presentation materials will be available in the AASHE Campus Sustainability Hub tomorrow, and you'll receive a notification once they're uploaded. Thank you so much, and have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.